Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's story begins on a cold, crowded city street where people walked fast, eyes glued to their phones, hearts guarded by routine, and kindness often got lost in the noise of busy lives. Among the endless flow of cars and footsteps stood a beggar woman near a traffic signal. Wrapped in a worn-out shawl, her face tired but calm, her eyes holding a quiet strength that most people never noticed. She sat there every day, never shouting, never forcing anyone to stop, just holding a small cardboard sign and whispering soft prayers under her breath. Most people ignored her, not because they were cruel, but because they were used to looking away. Some felt uncomfortable, some felt guilty, and some simply didn't want to be reminded that life wasn't fair to everyone. Among those people was a wealthy businessman named Richard Hoyle. Richard was known across the city as a man who had everything: money, power, respect, and a perfectly controlled life. His tailored suits, luxury car, and confident walk made him stand out wherever he went. He believed in hard work, discipline, and moving forward without looking back. That morning, Richard's car stopped at the traffic signal. His driver stared straight ahead, waiting for the light to turn green. Richard was checking messages on his phone, reviewing numbers, thinking about meetings and deals. That's when the beggar woman slowly stood and walked toward the car, stopping a few steps away. She didn't knock on the window. She didn't beg loudly. She just stood there quietly, hoping someone might notice. Richard glanced up for a brief second, saw her worn clothes, and frowned slightly. He turned his face away, annoyed more by the interruption than by the woman herself. To him, she was just another reminder of a world he didn't want to deal with. He waved his hand slightly, a silent signal that said, "Go away." But in the back seat of the car sat a young boy, around 8 years old. His name was Daniel. Unlike his father, Daniel wasn't focused on phones or schedules. He was watching the world outside the window, curious, observant, and open in a way only children can be. When he saw the woman standing there, something inside him stirred. His small hands pressed against the glass as he looked closely at her face. His eyes widened. His breathing slowed. His heart began to race. The traffic light was still red. Richard was about to tell the driver to move forward slightly when he felt a gentle tug on his sleeve. Daniel leaned closer, his voice trembling but clear as he whispered, "Dad, that's my mom." The words hit Richard like a sudden shock. He froze, his phone slipping slightly in his hand. He turned slowly to look at his son, searching his face for any sign that this was a joke or a misunderstanding. But Daniel's eyes were serious, filled with certainty, filled with something deeper than imagination. "What did you say?" Richard asked quietly, his voice tight. "That's my mom," Daniel repeated, pointing toward the woman outside. "Remember her?" Richard's heart pounded. Memories he had locked away for years suddenly began to push against the walls of his mind. Memories of a past he never talked about. A past he had buried beneath success and money. The traffic light was still red, but the world around him felt like it had stopped completely. He looked again at the beggar woman. Really looked this time. Her face was thinner, older, marked by hardship, but there was something familiar in her eyes. Something that made his chest ache. Years ago, before the wealth, before the business empire, Richard had been a very different man. He had been young, ambitious, and deeply in love with a woman named Emily. Emily was kind, gentle, and believed in Richard even when he didn't believe in himself. They had lived in a small apartment, struggling but hopeful. When Emily became pregnant, Richard promised her the world. He promised he would work harder, dream bigger, and give their child a better life. But life doesn't always follow promises. Richard's big opportunity came suddenly. An investor offered him a chance to build something huge, but it required total commitment and a clean image. The investor didn't want complications, didn't want responsibilities that might distract him. Richard panicked. He was afraid of losing the chance that could change his life forever. Emily wanted to stand by him. She wanted to face the future together. But Richard made a decision that would haunt him for years. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it was for the best. He left Emily, promising to come back once he was successful. He gave her some money and walked away, believing he could fix everything later. Blainer never came. The business grew. Money flowed in. Responsibilities multiplied. Richard convinced himself that Emily had moved on, that she had found help, that everything worked out. He never checked, never asked. Deep down, he didn't want to know. And now, years later, the past stood right in front of his car, wrapped in a worn shawl, ignored by the world and by him. The traffic light turned green. The driver started to move. But Richard shouted, "Stop." The car jerked to a halt. People honked behind them, annoyed and impatient. Richard didn't care. He opened the car door and stepped out. The beggar woman looked up, startled. For a moment, fear crossed her face. She took a step back, expecting anger or rejection. Instead, she saw a man staring at her as if he had seen a ghost. "Emily," Richard whispered. Her eyes widened. She stared at him, disbelief washing over her face. She hadn't expected this. Not today. Not ever. "Richard," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the noise of the street. Daniel climbed out of the car and ran toward her, stopping just in front of her. He looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Mom," he said, his small voice breaking. Emily dropped to her knees, her hand shaking as she reached for him. She touched his face gently, as if afraid he might disappear. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pulled him into her arms. For years, she had wondered what kind of life he was living, whether he was safe, whether he remembered her. She had never imagined this moment. People around them began to stop and stare. The busy street slowed as curiosity replaced routine. Richard stood there, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice heavy with guilt. "Why didn't you find me?" Emily looked up at him, pain and exhaustion in her eyes. "I tried," she said quietly. "I tried for years. But doors were closed. Calls went unanswered. I didn't want to chase someone who didn't want to be found." Richard swallowed hard. Every word felt like a weight pressing down on his chest. "I never meant for this to happen," he said. I thought things would work out." Emily gave a sad smile. "Life doesn't work on thoughts, Richard. It works on choices." Those words hit him harder than any accusation could have. He looked at Daniel, who was still holding his mother tightly, afraid to let go. In that moment, Richard realized how much he had missed. Birthdays, first words, first steps, moments that money could never buy back. "Please," Richard said, his voice breaking, "come with us. Let me help. Let me fix this." Emily hesitated. Years of disappointment don't disappear in a single moment. Trust doesn't rebuild itself with words alone. But she looked at Daniel, at the hope in his eyes, and she nodded slowly. They got into the car together. People watched in silence. As the luxury vehicle drove away, carrying a story no one on that street would ever fully understand. Over the following weeks, Richard tried to make things right, not with grand gestures, but with presence. He listened. He learned. He apologized again and again, not expecting forgiveness, but hoping for understanding. Emily shared her struggles. The nights she went hungry so Daniel could eat, the jobs she lost, the help that never came. Richard listened, tears often filling his eyes. Daniel watched his parents carefully. He didn't understand everything, but he understood enough to know that something important was happening. Something fragile, something precious. Richard arranged a home for Emily, not as charity, but as a shared space. He made time for his son, canceling meetings, ignoring calls, choosing moments over money. Slowly, painfully, trust began to grow. Not perfectly, not as fully, but honestly. One evening, as they sat together at dinner, Daniel looked at his father and smiled. "I'm glad you stopped the car," he said. Richard reached across the table and held his son's hand. "So am I," he replied. Emily watched them, her heart filled with cautious hope. Life had hurt her deeply, but it had also brought her back to a moment she never thought she'd have again. Sometimes, the people we ignore carry the stories that can change our lives forever. Sometimes, the past doesn't come back to punish us, but to give us a second chance. And sometimes, it takes the innocent voice of a child to remind us of what truly matters. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to look around you. Today, kindness might be waiting right in front of you, quietly hoping to be seen. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.